Welcome to the Lady Up America podcast. I'm Diane Canada, your host. I am so glad you're here today. Ladies, I have been so excited about this show because I think it's going to give us so much insight into people who hold opposing views. A lot of us are struggling right now with friends and family members who have opposing views, and we're wondering, how do we get through to them? How do we reach them? Well, what if I told you my guest today is going to give you that answer? And I can tell you it's right in line with everything we teach here in Lady Up America. So get yourself a hot cup of tea, settle in for this conversation for the next half hour. And I can't wait to introduce you to Tricia Fenimore. Be right back.
Around this town, lady up around this town. Victory on the battleground, we claim it now. Lady up, lady up. Lady up, lady up.
All right, ladies, welcome back. Okay, we're going to get a lot of our questions answered today. You're going to meet Tricia Fenimore. She was really one of the people that we hope in Lady Up America to reach. She was so adamantly opposed to God, adamantly opposed to conservative values. She's going to teach us what drew her to God, what drew her to conservative values. And I think this is just going to be a compelling conversation. So please welcome writer and speaker and just Christian extraordinaire, Tricia Fenimore to the stage. Hi, Tricia. How are
Hi, I'm
you?
doing well. Thank you so much for having me today. I'm excited to be
Oh, thank
here.
you. I'm so excited to have you. I've been looking so forward to this because you're going to help fill in a lot of blanks for the moms. You and I have already had the conversation, and I've been following you on Instagram. You've been blowing up because I think there's so many hungry people out there that want to hear your story and they're inspired to hear it. But I just think we have so many things we can learn from you, so many lessons we can learn. So tell us, before we go into the conversion, tell us a little bit about what your life was like before. Let's draw the contrast today.
Man, you want to talk about the epitome of a self led life. It was the life that I was leading. I became an atheist in the fifth grade. It was there that I had a friend in school who told me that her family didn't pray or go to church. And I
Mm,
was always forced to go to church. There really wasn't examples of a living faith or any family prayer time really that I can recall in my home growing up. And so without a connection to God, the concept of God and religion was very easy for me to walk away from because I didn't
mm,
see the example of a religion that was love and that was peace. And so, where I didn't think that could provide it for me, I set out on this course to try to find it out in the world, which, spoiler alert, I'm here and I'm a Christian and I love Jesus. And that really is the only place that I found in that amount of time. I can tell you, I tried every which thing. I tried alcohol, I tried men, I tried dyeing my hair this color, that color, I tried moving across the country, I tried everything. I tried changing
mhm.
my diet, I tried like literally everything, and nothing was able to fill me with peace until I reached up, you know.
Yeah, that God-shaped hole in our heart, just nothing can fill that. Why does it take us so long to see that? I mean, why I don't know. We can get to that maybe in another podcast, but this hostility that you had toward the faith and the hostility you had toward conservatives, tell me a little bit about that. Like, what goes through your mind when you're in that space?
So, I think that I bought into a lot of the standard stereotypes of that judgmental Christian. And look, as a Christian, there are judgmental people who
There are.
identify with our faith, absolutely. But just because the devil tries to have his way in our faith doesn't mean that we should define the faith by those efforts by the enemy. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
I didn't realize until I was much older in my 20s. So I became an atheist in the fifth grade, and I said my first prayer at the age of 23 to this idea of God that I wasn't quite sure. I tried to look every which way except Christianity. And finally, 2 years after my first prayer in 2013 was when I found Christianity, and it really changed my life. But the hostility, I mean, I was the angriest, most militant, combative atheist you've ever met. And I know there's some people listening and watching who are like, there's no way you're more combative than so and so. And it's, honey, you should have met me. Like, I would argue with anyone who even looked like they believed in God. And I had such a hostility toward the faith because I think that that is what the enemy seeks. If our religion is the source of peace, if Jesus is the Prince of Peace, which he is, and we know that, then the enemy must be the opposite of that. And so we
Yeah.
shouldn't be surprised when people who don't have Jesus in their lives are angry and are hostile. And I think what we
Mhm.
can bring to the table to differentiate ourselves from not only non believers, but the whole world in which is basically run by non believers is that peace that everyone is seeking. Because it was those Christians who showed me unconditional love, those Christians who let me say all the problems I had with Christianity and looked at me with nothing but love and said, you know what, Trisha? We still love you. And more importantly, so does Jesus. And they
Mm.
stayed with me through that anger and through that hostility and that combativeness. And they just persisted in love through that. And it was there when I saw that they weren't going to meet a fight with a fight, that they were going to meet it like Jesus and say, you know what, we're going to meet this with love. We're going to pray for you because you know not what you're doing right now in
Yeah.
pursuing this lifestyle. And fortunately or unfortunately, I had suffered enough wreckage in my life to know that the answer wasn't going to be found out in the world by all the things that the world was telling me to value because I'd tried them and came up short, to say the least.
Wow. Okay, so a couple things I want to just go back and revisit that you just said that I think are so key. One is that we do have a lot of Christians that give Christianity a bad name. We need to acknowledge that. I think the judgmental, legalistic, very tied to the rules, looking down on other people. We do have a lot of Christians that maybe that's all they've known, and we can give grace there too. But that type of approach to people that hold opposing views or people who are just still lost, that is never going to win them. There's never going to, that approach is coming in and pointing your finger and telling them where they're wrong and all that. That is never, ever, ever going to work. And we see that both in spirituality, but we also see it in the political realm now too. People that just can't seem to get on the same page about things. They come in with those fingers pointed and you're wrong and here's why you're wrong and all. It's never going to work. And it seems counterintuitive, which is why I get a hard time a lot in Lady Up America because our whole approach to this is a graceful approach to winning people and maintaining that peace and all of that. So that's why it resonates with me. The second part I wanted to cover there is that it's the peace and it is the grace and it is the love that's going to win people, that's going to actually set the atmosphere for that person then to feel safe to come into that faith. So if you can speak on that, maybe any comments you have about that, because that is so key. It's, you know what you've done, Trisha? You've just proven Lady Up America.
Well,
Like,
I've
that's what
done my
you've
job.
done.
Good night, everybody. No. It's
Well, you've
interesting.
proven it.
It's
Yeah.
interesting to bring up politics because through the course of my life and my early adulthood, where I was not a believer, I have voted for every which left, right, third party, all of them. And, I've gone to groups of different organizations for politics on probably every side of the aisle, if out of nothing else but curiosity. And what's interesting that I find if we look at the political climate that we find ourselves in, this will be a really good parallel to how we can approach people with faith. So we look at people who don't hold conservative values, and we can think that they're wrong, and we can know it in the core of our being that they're wrong. But if they
Mhm.
come at us with a condescending, judgmental, I'm going to talk down to you spirit, like,
Yeah.
there's no room for a conversation. Like, we've already put the walls up, we've shut it down. Like, there's no common ground to be had because it's clear the other person doesn't want it. But when we turn that on its face and we say, well, are we going into conversations about faith that way? Could that put up those same walls in a different way? Because look, we know that for some, and I say this as a former atheist, as a recovering alcoholic, as a former very, unconservative values type voter and supporter. I say this because it's like, when we come with love and when we come with peace, we're bringing something different than
Mhm.
what is going to put those walls up. And in fact, no matter how different and disparate our beliefs may be, if we come from a place of peace, those walls naturally come down and it intrigues the spirit of the listener, the spirit that the listener might not even acknowledge that they have. But believe
Mhm.
me, as a former atheist, it matters and it shows, because if you go to a person who's not a believer, not with the idea to lecture, not with the idea to wag a finger, but with the idea and the intention to understand, why don't
Yes.
you believe? And then let them get to know your heart without pressuring. Jesus
Right.
never, I always say, Jesus never forced himself on anybody. I'm not going to do it either. He never argued on his behalf.
Right.
I'm not going to do it either. There are enough people in this world who will have ears to hear, who are drowning
Mhm.
from the
Mhm.
outcomes that the world has given, the outcomes that the world will always give. That when they come face to face with the living faith of Jesus Christ and Christianity, they cannot help but be intrigued. And
Mhm.
that's what mattered to me. Was it wasn't some group that it was just people speaking from their heart and taking the time not to judge me, even though they knew I was wrong. They knew I was wrong,
Mhm.
but they didn't tell me that I was wrong. They just wanted to
Mhm.
understand where I was coming from. And it is a bit self-serving in that way, because when you know better where somebody else is coming from, the points of impact, that how to have that conversation better, because the conversation about Jesus, it is one size fits all, but it's also not. He met people in every position that they were in, and while the message was true, the way in which he met them was specific to the individual. The way in which he met the woman at the well was at the well, in the middle of the day, in the hot summer heat. How he met other people along his journey was completely different, but he had to meet her where she was.
Yes, 100%. Yeah, we have to meet them where they're at, and when you say that they're drowning, you're so right. They even if they will never admit that to you, we all come hardwired with that need to for that peace and that acceptance and that belonging and that unconditional love. It's just in us. God put it in us. He's our creator and he put it in us. I had a friend one time who she grew up Catholic and she turned on the faith and she went or literally around the world. She did the eat, pray, love thing and went
Right.
around and explored all of these other religions.
I would
And
have
she
done
would
that had I
argue,
could have afforded it, but I couldn't. I settled for
yeah.
books from the library and
But I think that searching,
right.
we all are searching. And she would just pick these fights with me and she'd say, Diane, there has to be more than one way to God. There just has to be. And my answer to her is I said, Colleen, I'm glad there's one. There didn't even have to be one, but thank God there's one, but there's only one. I said, but you have to see that for yourself. And so she did. She went all the way around. And then by the time she came back, she said, you're right. There, she came back to her faith and she re engaged with her Christian faith. But people do have to see it for themselves. There's nothing that we can do to force somebody to see it or to force our experience on them. You have to meet them where they're at and you have to give them the chance to arrive at their own aha moment
And
and for them to have the grace and the dignity to do that.
right. And it's so important what you talked about, the dignity of their own journey, and to have patience that the seeds
Yeah,
that you've sown might break soil, but it might not do it on your timetable. I had a
right.
pastor who poured into me. I was living in my hometown in the Midwest, in the rural Midwest, and he would meet me for coffee. I was living in active alcoholism and addiction, and it was one of the worst periods of my life. And he would inexplicably invite me to coffee, and I didn't know what to expect, but I was so turned around I would just go sometimes. And he would just look at me with the kindest eyes and just say,
Mhm.
how are you doing? And I count every person who follows a social media account of mine as a win in his column in heaven, because
Mhm.
he sowed those
Oh,
seeds into me, and those seeds didn't sprout for years after
yeah.
those exchanges. But he was the first Christian to just show the love of Jesus in such a pure, patient way, not pressuring me at all. And it was really life altering. And I
Mhm.
think that you touched on an interesting thing too, where when we talk to people who are like, there's got to be more than one way to God, it, well, it's easy to believe that. Our hearts may want to believe that, but the Bible does say our hearts are deceitful above all else.
Yeah.
Like we can't go based off what we wish were true or
Yeah.
what we want to be true. And that's something that I've come to realize the more I get the privilege of maturing in this faith is if I think one way, but the Bible says another way, I'm wrong. I lay down my opinion and my it is laying down my opinions is the very least I could do for the faith that saved my life, for the God that
Yes.
saved my life. And when we opt for our own opinions and what we think the way should be rather than the truth, then we make a false idol and a false God of our opinions. And I don't know about you, but I have more than enough wreckage and more than enough references in my past life to be like, you know what, my
Yeah.
opinions are pretty turned around. That's why I don't really
Yeah.
take too seriously a lot of these celebrity endorsements come political season. I'm like, I don't know, you've been in the public eye for a while and you don't make great decisions. Is your endorsement really that great? But
Exactly.
I think it's
Yeah.
a lot of pride, and that's what I think. If we can bring peace and we can bring humility to the conversations, that already will set us apart in the world. And
Yeah.
because there is only one way to God, we have an obligation as believers to do what the Bible instructs us to do and go and evangelize and make disciples. If you
Yes.
really believe that there is one way to God, then it compels us, as it should,
Mhm.
to go out and try to reach people with that.
Yes, and it's the most loving thing we can do is to tell the truth, even if that person spits it out, doesn't wanna hear it. We all of this that we're seeing in our culture today, where we have to
Mhm.
affirm all of these opinions, affirm all of these lifestyles, or else we're non-loving in their eyes. The most loving thing we can do is tell the truth. For these moms and ladies that are listening today, who maybe have people in their lives that are where you were
Mhm.
when you were full-blown atheist, didn't wanna hear anything about the faith.
Right.
Obviously, the things you've said are already so important about just loving them, but this whole speaking truth in love, if they have an opportunity to confront, to speak that truth in love, what are some phrases they could use, or what's the best way for them to approach those conversations in your mind?
Yeah, so a great question. I think speaking the truth is never unkind, but you can speak the truth unkindly. So there's a difference
Right.
there where we need to adjust our heart postures and say, are we speaking the truth or are we being harsh and condemning? And it's an interesting thing in our culture where we talk about affirming others and this. And I was actually just thinking of a video I wanted to put together for social media where I made the parallel. I love my husband, but if I see him doing something that's going to stray him from something good or put him in harm's way for something bad, I am obligated to tell him the truth and to
Right.
try to correct his course and vice versa. That's our partnership. But I
Yeah.
do think correction is best given when you have proximity to the person. So I'll
Mm.
make this analogy. Look, we're on the internet all the time nowadays. If you're like most of us, messaging some stranger or commenting on their photo probably isn't going to do much to win hearts and minds for Jesus
Yeah.
because you
Yeah.
don't have proximity to be correcting the person. You don't know them well enough. And that's why it's so important to get to know prospective believers is so that you know
Mhm.
where they're coming from and you have that proximity and you've earned the right to weigh in on something that you might say, hey, that might be damaging if you do that, or you might want to check on that. And as far as pastors go, believe me, it breaks my heart to see what's going on, but abuses within religion and religious leaders perverting the message and the gospel for their own aims is nothing
Yeah.
new. It is, in
Yeah.
fact, the devil's most clever trick, in my opinion. It's be some mimicry, some imitation church that's not real,
Mhm.
and that subtly,
Mhm.
slowly, under the name of God and Christianity, guides people away. And that's why it's so important for every believer to read the Bible for themselves. My
Right.
husband and I were watching this documentary a couple weeks ago about this horrible situation that occurred in this church and this pastor who was claiming all these things. And he was saying it said it in the Bible. And I kept looking at my husband and I go, but it doesn't. Yep. And
Yeah.
I think that's why it's so important to not have so a lot of people, the most prevalent way that they experience the Bible is through the lips of somebody else. But like the game
Mhm.
of telephone, things can get converted and twisted and sometimes maliciously, sometimes well intentionally. They just don't understand. And that's why
Yeah.
it's so important for everybody to read their Bible, a translation that compels them to read it, that excites them, and praise
Mhm.
before they open it. God, open my eyes and show me what you want me to see in this living perfect document that's going to meet me right where I'm at and guide me to where you want me to go. There can be no middleman to the Bible,
Right.
in my opinion. We can have mentors, we can have leaders, we can have pastors and priests and whatever, and that's great. But at the end of the day, if we are going to another person to wholly depend on them to interpret the Bible, we're putting them in an inappropriate position where their flesh might start to come out, where everyone loves power. And so it's
Mhm.
so important that everyone has their own experience with the Bible. And honestly, I would say that's good advice to pass on to people who don't believe, and to say, look,
Mhm.
we know that you've Googled the verses, because I used to Google the verse, all the verses that go against my current political beliefs. And I could list those, but I could list no other. And I certainly didn't read them in context. There was no context for any of it. It was just right. But it's like, when I was encouraged by pastors who fortunately were like, go read your Bible. And I started having this living experience with this book. And I started to experience some of those paradoxes. I'll be honest with you. One of my least favorite verses, if not my least favorite verse, was that wives should be subservient to their husbands. The first time I read that, I like took my Bible. I was like, now there must be an amendment in here somewhere. That can't possibly be. But there again, when my opinions and the word diverge, which way do I go? And what I did was I closed the book and I go, God, we're gonna just table that for now. I'm gonna pray that you I'm single, so I don't have to worry about it right now. I'm gonna pray that you turn me into the woman you want me to be. And by the time I find the man that you want me to be with, I'm gonna just trust that maybe I'll get there. And it's true because now I have a husband who I willingly submit to. And not only that, but I want to, because he's a good, honorable man who loves God and is after God's heart and wants me to be after God's heart. And so when I
Yeah.
go to him to ask things and he's go pray on it and see what God says instead of what he wants me to do,
Mhm.
it's an amazing thing how God works everything perfectly. But some of these things in the Bible that we have problems with, we don't need to address them right now. We can
Yeah.
let the faith grow and we can marinate in it until one day it will. And,
Yeah, one of the things I always say about the Bible, about our relationship with Jesus, is he's got the best drip campaign ever. You know? It's like he
100%.
takes he just yeah, he'll take us so far, and we need to let all of that sink in and let that process, and then we're ready for the next lesson, and then the next lesson, and by the time you've been walking with him for a while, I've been walking with him now very intentionally for at least 25 years, maybe closer to 30 at this point, and I am constantly evolving. Like, I don't think we'll ever arrive, and I'm just seeing things even in the last year that are like, "Oh, that's why you say that, God. Oh, okay." But if we that's where the trust comes in. And we don't like a lot of those verses. We don't like a lot because it's warring our flesh, the human side of us is warring with that spiritual side. God says that's why the flesh has to die. We have to be, and I know that sounds like a real churchy way to say that, but it's true. Like our human wants and desires have to, it's not that they're squashed, they have to be replaced
Right.
with the things that he wants for us. And then once we start to to trust and walk in that, we start to see that his ways are so much better. Like the things that we're clinging to and holding on to that we think are so important to us, once we start to understand his way, it's, oh my gosh, why was I holding that so tight? And that submission to your husband, it's same with me. I'm married and my husband is a wonderful, godly man. And when that God created that hierarchy on purpose, it's not to oppress a woman, it's to really celebrate the differences that we have and how that structure is so important for the family. His design for the family is perfect. When you've got a man that is submitting to God and he loves the Lord the way that God loves the church, then he can be trusted. Then a woman can trust him and then really understand her place in the home. It's not her place, her role in the house. And she's the nurturer. And we all we're equipped for different things in the family and in this world. And once we understand and start to accept that, it's so beautiful, isn't it?
It really is. And I think when I read that verse when I was younger, I had such a one dimensional, I was like, they're saying that all women should submit to all men. And it's no, they're
No,
saying if you
no.
seek God in finding the husband that he has for you, that
Right.
it will be a natural intersection and that it will be a seamless transition. And it has been because
Yeah.
God's view is so much bigger. It's not just a husband and like any husband and you as the wife. It's
Right.
your husband that I created
Right.
for you. And then
Yeah.
everything makes sense. And I agree. The longer I am in a marriage, my husband and I were coming up on 6 years married. We have two little boys together. The
Mhm.
longer I am married, the longer I'm a mom and we're building this family, the more I see how perfectly God designed it. And that's why conservative values are so important to me because right
Right.
now we're seeing a war on the family and people trying to
Mhm.
define family in every which way. And
Yeah.
look, that's not to say that there aren't terribly dysfunctional and tragically unhealthy family systems out there. There are. But
Yeah.
when we go to God, like those woundings can be healed and we can create
Mhm.
something different.
Yeah.
So there is nothing beyond God's resurrecting power in my experience, not
Mhm.
of addiction, not any dysfunctional generational cycle, trauma, sin, whatever you want to call it. And I have people write me these days from all over the world who have gone through things I can't even fathom. And
Mhm.
yet they tell me of their peace and hope found in Jesus. And that is their
Mm.
testimony and how they're doing things differently. A woman just wrote to me recently. She had a terrible childhood, just things that no child should ever go through. And yet she pursues Jesus and raises her family in the faith and raises them in such a way to heal that wounding so as not to pass it on. And the way of the
Yeah.
world is just to propagate the pain. The
Yeah.
world doesn't have any balm for the pain. The world doesn't have
Mhm.
any medicine. There is only one source of medicine, and that is the doctor.
That is so true. That is so true. And when people say, "Give me some proof that Christianity is better, or give me some proof that Jesus is real," look at the transformed lives. And even your life has been radically transformed for the better. You're so much happier now than you were when you were walking in that dark place. Me too. Same with mine. It took me a long time for God to bring me the right man. And I went through all different kinds of things in my life too, but it's the transformed lives that is where the evidence is. And that peace that surpasses understanding, no matter what's going on in this world right now, when you actually have that inner knowing that I heard a pastor tell me the other day, this was something that I didn't catch before. When God said, "My peace I leave with you," my peace, the peace he had, the same peace that he had when he was climbing up on that cross, the
Mm.
same peace he had, no matter what was coming at, literally staring hell down. That's the peace he has left with us. So there's nothing that can go on in this world that where that peace will escape us when we're walking with him that closely. I love that it was the peace and the grace and the love that drew you. I think that's such an important lesson for us today. I do want to mention before we let you go, because I know we're almost out of time here. You've written a book and it's called Please Pray for Them, I believe it is.
Pray for them. Yep.
And tell us a little bit about the book.
Yeah, so it's called Pray for Them, the true story of a racist white Christian called to Black seminary. And if that makes some of your listeners nervous, don't worry, because believe you me, when God called me to write it, I was pretty nervous. I looked around, I was like, you know what you made me look like, right? You want me to write a book about what? But it's gone on to sell copies in over a dozen different countries. It's got a 4.8-star
Wow.
review right now on Amazon. And I got to tell you, on the topic of racism, that is something that is often politicized in our country, but that Christians should be at the forefront of. what I want to say is there was a review that came in. It's my most meaningful review thus far. And it says, if you want to read a book about racism spoken from the heart of Jesus and not pushing agendas, read this book. Because
Oh, that's awesome.
yeah, because it does transcend politics. And that's why politics should always be beneath our faith, is because
Yes.
if we're talking about universal truths, if we're talking about the gospel of Jesus Christ and how he
Mhm,
calls us to treat one another as his other
mhm.
children and as other occupants here on earth, as potential believers, how we're called to treat everyone on this earth, it transcends politics. And that's what
Yes.
we're called to do. Jesus talks about the importance of somebody's heart. He said if a man even looks at a woman with lust in his heart, he's committed
Mhm.
adultery. And
Right.
so if we look at people with judgment, with hate, with prejudice, with anything other than love and
Mhm.
dignity, then what are we committing in ours? And I
Right.
just want to kick back real quick because I was one of those scientific atheists, or at least I thought I fancied myself to be, who wanted evidence. And if you want a foolproof line for the atheist who wants evidence, you just look at them and say, I'm a data point. I am a data point. My life being changed is a data point in this experiment. And like you can't
Mm.
negate it because you don't want to believe it. There's a term called researcher bias, which is when scientists refuse to see data because it doesn't support their little pet theories. And so if
Yeah.
you find one of these people who are really fancy themselves to be objective, which no human is, but that's another conversation for another time. It's like we
Mhm.
are data points. And to the exact extent that God has delivered me from alcoholism, he has delivered me from all these different false idols, including prejudice and hate in my heart.
Mm.
It's like he can do that. And that those changes are our testimony. How we show up differently in the world is our testimony. That's the advertisement for the faith.
Mm.
Show up to a situation different, and people start tapping their chin and think, well, something's different about that. I can't put my finger on. It's because we did the experiment of inviting Jesus into our hearts and it changed us. And now there are billions of data points throughout humankind who have done this. Look at the data. They want to talk about driven by trust the science, trust the data. It's honey, trust the data, trust the numbers. How many
Yeah.
Christians throughout the history of humanity have experienced changes, who have been delivered from addiction? If they don't believe you, send them my way because I got tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands of people who follow my account who have been delivered from addictions and illnesses and all sorts of calamity and trauma. And it's we are the data points that prove his existence. These struggles
Amen.
are given to us for a reason, just like the blind man in the Bible. And I'll end here because I know I go long, but it's like
It's
the
okay.
blind man in the Bible, and the disciples were looking at Jesus saying, why was this man born blind? Was it his sins? Was it his ancestors' sins? Was it his sins? Was it his ancestors' sins? You know, when it comes to the topic of racism or any of this. And Jesus says, no, 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 no. This man was born blind so that the glory of God might be made manifest in this world through his healing. And
Yes.
I was blind politically, but more than that, spiritually. I was so blind. But through his amazing grace, now I see. And I am eternally
Mm.
grateful to serve the God who has saved me.
Mm. That is so beautifully put. I don't think that I could even follow up with anything else other than that gives us so much hope. And those of us who are walking with the Lord, and those of us who are seeing our country deteriorate, those of us who are seeing so many people that are blind out there, one of the things I say all the time in Lady Up America is we have to look on them with compassion because they're blind and they're bumping into walls they just can't see. And
100%.
our job is to love them and create an atmosphere where God can move them, move their heart. Only He can move a heart. We can't do it, but we can definitely be a part of that. And we have a part to play. God has a part to play, but that is how we need to look at them. It's not that they're our enemy, they're just blind.
They're just lost.
They're just blind.
They deserve our
Yeah, they're
compassion and our sympathy. Yeah, there, but for the
yeah,
grace of God go we.
yeah, yeah, and I think if we can lead with that. Again, it doesn't mean we let people walk on us, abuse us, we don't affirm
Right,
lifestyles that we don't it's not any of that. It's
right.
just maintaining that we just stand. We stand on the promises of God. We lead with compassion, we lead with love, and maintain that peace. and God will do the heavy lifting in a heart. It's
Right.
precious. Trisha, you are just an amazing soul. God has a huge call on your life. I know that you're already serving just with all the testimonies that you've already shared with us that are coming in, the impact that you're making in people's lives. I thank you for going public with your story and making it possible for other people to hear it and for them to be inspired and come to you. If people want to pick up a copy of the book, you just said they can do that on Amazon. Pray for Them is the name of it.
Yep.
And they can also find it on your website. I've got it as triciafenimore.com.
Yep. That's it.
All right. For that mom or that woman out there that's listening today that's struggling and that wants, maybe it's an adult child, like in my case, that's estranged, or someone in their life that they truly care about, that they love. Any last parting comments or thoughts for her today?
Nobody wants your child to be closer to God than God. Nobody's
Mm,
trying harder to reach that person that you love so much more than Him. And you don't have to try so hard. You can rest knowing that, just like me, believe me, it was way dark before the dawn, but it took that. Sometimes it takes what it takes. And I saw the other day, we cannot save our children from their testimonies. And to
mm,
just trust that walk, that you have laid the seeds, that you have sown the seeds that are required, that will one day sprout forth, that God will put the right people in their path. We serve an incredible God, full of miracles. Think of all the tiny miracles down to the inch that happen in your life. Now universalize that across all the believers. And just imagine the magnitude of the God that we serve, and that nobody wants that child closer to him than him. He's going to leave the
mm,
99 and go after the one. We just got
mhm,
to pray that our child reaches a point of vulnerability. And unfortunately, sometimes that's out of pain. And that was it for my life. But pain has its purpose if it can lead us back to Jesus. And then it's the most beautiful thing in the world. The day of my rock bottom in addiction was the worst day of my life as I lived it. Looking back now, it is the best day of my life because it was the
mm,
beginning of my next life, of this,
mm,
of the reborn life. But we got to go through that pain sometimes. The old man, the old person has to die. And sometimes it's a violent death, at least if you're like me. But just pray for them and remind God that you trust Him. God, I trust you with my kids. I was once talking to a mom and she wasn't a believer. She was like, I can respect people who pray, but I just could never do it with my kids. It's just too important. And I was like, no, but the most important is the one that is the thing you got to trust him the most because you can't do it. You can't do
right.
it. But we got to remind
That's right.
him that we trust him to do it. And
Mm,
Jesus said, pray and thank God as though what you have asked for is already on the way. Thank God that my child is already coming back to you, God. Thank you that you have a plan and a hope and a purpose for them, that you are guiding them back to you as we speak.
mm. Beautiful. Beautiful. Thank you so much. Ah, gives moms like me hope. You give moms like me hope. And I know a lot of people today that are listening, I know you've brought a lot of hope into their heart today too. Thank you, Tricia Fenimore. You're welcome back on this show anytime. And just thanks for everything that you're doing out there in
Thank
the
you
world
for
for
this
the Lord.
incredible show. You're doing such incredible work for his kingdom. Thank you so much for having me as a guest.
Yeah, thank you. All right, we'll see you again soon. All right, ladies, I hope this has been as much a blessing for you as it has been for me. God is so good, and He's really got it under control. And Tricia said, He's going to put people on the path of those that we love. He wants to win them. I heard someone recently, they said, stop praying for reconciliation with your son, Diane. Start praying for his reconciliation with God. And that is our job. We can pray. We're not helpless. There's nothing more powerful than a mother's prayer. And that's our job. That's the battle plan for us. And then just remember too, those people that you're encountering out there that hold opposing views, or the people that you feel like are just so blind right now, let's show up with compassion. Let's lead with love. And that's what we're required to do. Our job is to plant. That's all. The harvest is up to the Lord. All right, ladies. This was a good one. Thanks to Tricia, and we'll see you next time. Lady up.
Around this town. on the battleground.